The Dominion fleet arrived in perfect formation, a vast armada of warships descending upon Kepler-62F with the precision of a calculated execution. Every Dominion campaign began the same way: shock, firepower, annihilation. The system's human defenders had gone silent weeks ago. Resistance was expected to be minimal, if not non-existent. Admiral Zalvir watched from the bridge of his command vessel, arms folded behind his back, his scaled lips curling into a smirk. Humanity had fought well enough to be remembered, but this was the end. The last colonies would fall, and their species would be erased from history. He turned to his tactical officer. Deploy ground forces. Sweep the colony. Wipe them out. Across the barren streets, Dominion soldiers advanced, plasma rifles humming, scanning for targets. But something was wrong. "Sir," a field captain reported through the comms, voice tight with unease. "No civilians. No bodies. No resistance." Zalvir frowned. "Scanners must be malfunctioning." The captain hesitated. "Sir, there's something else. The buildings, some of them are sealed shut. Others look abandoned, but the lights are still on. No signs of struggle. It's like they just left." Then the first scream cut through the comms. The bridge went silent. Zalvir turned sharply toward his officers. "Squad 4, report." Silence. "Squad 4, respond." Static. More screams. Then gunfire. Then nothing. Zalvir clenched his jaw. Who is engaging them? No one answered. Below, in the streets of the silent colony, panic rippled through the Dominion ranks. Shadows moved in the corners of their visors. Soldiers turned at flickers of motion, weapons sweeping empty streets. Then another scream, closer. A body hit the ground, helmet crushed inward, blood pooling across the pavement. The captain cursed. "We're being hunted." Zalvir's claws tapped against the metal railing. This was not possible. By what? There are no life signs. More gunfire. More screaming. Then a voice, crackling through the comms in perfect Dominion dialect. "You never should have come here." Zalvir's blood ran cold. The transmission was human. Across the colony, chaos erupted. Dominion squads fell back into defensive formations, but there was no enemy to fight, only death striking from the darkness. Helmet feeds blinked out one by one. Heat signatures appeared for seconds before vanishing. Soldiers fired wildly into empty spaces, burning holes into the abandoned buildings. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The humans weren't fighting like a military. They were hunting. Zalvir's hands clenched into fists. "Pull them out," he ordered. "All forces, retreat to the transports. We'll raise the colony from orbit." "Sir, we don't know what we're up against." "I said pull them out." It was too late. Gideon Reaver watched from a rooftop, visor reflecting the chaos below. His breathing was steady, heart rate calm. The Dominion had come expecting a war. But humanity had already won the moment they set foot on the planet. Their mistake was thinking they were the predators. Reaver tapped his comms. Phase 2. The order echoed through encrypted channels. Explosions ripped through the streets, planted charges collapsing buildings onto retreating Dominion squads. Shadows flickered between alleyways, human operatives moving with lethal precision. Plasma bolts ripped through enemy ranks before they could react. On the bridge of his command ship, Zalvir watched in horror as his ground forces were systematically erased. "This isn't war," one of his officers whispered. "It's a massacre." Zalvir gritted his teeth. "Bombard them. Now." Missile silos ignited. Orbital cannons turned downward. Nothing happened. The targeting systems blinked, error messages scrolling across every screen. Then another voice came through the Dominion fleet's private channels. "Try it!" Zalvir's throat tightened. That voice again. Calm. Unshaken. like it already knew the outcome. His comms officer's voice wavered. "Sir, our weapon controls are compromised. Someone's inside our systems." "No. Not possible. Humans weren't this advanced. They weren't this efficient." Zalvir turned to his crew. "Override their access. Now." The officer swallowed hard. "We can't." Zalvir's vision darkened. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't a rebellion. This was extermination. And they were the ones being culled. The main screen flickered, and Zalvir found himself staring into the eyes of a human, pale, battle-worn, gaze cold as the void. The man didn't gloat. Didn't smile. Just watched. "I don't know your name," the human said, voice steady. "Doesn't matter. I'll remember your face, though. Right before I burn your empire to the ground." Zalvir bared his fangs. "You think you've won? You're insects. We are the Dominion." The human tilted his head slightly. "And we are the reason the stars fear the dark." The screen cut out. Zalvir's heart pounded against his ribs. He turned to his officers. "Reroute control, fire everything we have." Silence. The ship shuddered. Not from enemy fire. From within. "Sir!" A bridge officer's voice broke into a shriek. "Internal explosions, hull breaches on all decks. We've been static." Zalvir barely had time to process before the lights flickered, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. And then he heard them. Footsteps. Inside the ship. He whirled, claws unsheathing, just as the emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind him. Isolation. They had boarded his flagship. His guards fell into defensive stances, weapons raised. The door to the command deck burst inward. A shadow moved. Not an army. Not an invasion force. Just one man. The human. No armor, no heavy weapons. Just a blade in his hand. And a look that said it was already over. Zalvir roared and lunged. His guards fired. The human moved. Too fast. Gunfire flashed. The first Dominion soldier went down in a blur of motion, throat cut before he could scream. The second fell without firing a shot. The third tried to run. Never made it. Then silence. Zalvir panted, blood on his uniform, heart slamming against his ribs. He swung wildly. The human sidestepped. A sharp pain ripped across Zalvir's arm. Then another. His claws hit empty air. Cold metal pressed against his throat. The human didn't speak. Just held him there. Then, finally, whispered, "Run." And then he was gone. Zalvir collapsed to his knees, gasping. Alarms blared. His ship was going down. Through the viewport, he saw his fleet breaking apart, fire-consuming warships once thought invincible. And for the first time in his life, Admiral Zalvir, warlord of the Dominion, felt something unfamiliar crawl down his spine. Terror. This wasn't war. This was the end. And humanity was the executioner. The Dominion was in full retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. On the bridge of the last remaining command ship, High Lord Valezan stood motionless, his claws gripping the railing as he watched the tactical display. Every Dominion fleet marker was blinking out one by one. Entire battle groups erased. Communications were down. Emergency relays were compromised. His empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy, was being torn apart. Not by superior firepower. Not by overwhelming numbers. By something far worse. The humans had gotten inside. His officers trembled, their voices tight with fear. "High Lord, we've lost contact with all outer fleets. Kepler 62F is gone. The Homeworld Defense Force." Silenced. Valezan's voice was barely above a whisper. They silenced them. He turned. eyes scanning the terrified faces of his crew. These were seasoned warriors, bred for conquest, yet now they stood paralyzed, their rigid training unraveling under the weight of an impossible reality. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were dismantling them. "Sir, the enemy has breached our network. We can't trust our own systems." The comms officer's hands trembled over the console. They're inside everything. A cold realization settled over the room. There was no battle left to fight. There was only survival. Valezon's mind raced. The Dominion had faced countless wars, had crushed countless species. But none had fought like this. None had turned war itself into a weapon. The humans had known from the beginning that they were outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched. So they did what no species had ever dared. They became the nightmare. A voice crackled over the Dominion's private frequency. A voice that did not belong. "High Lord." The bridge fell silent. The humans were speaking directly to him. He stiffened. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, Gideon Reaver. The name meant nothing, but the voice, it carried something weightier than any title. It was steady. Cold. Patient. Valezon exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "We should speak, Reaver." Another pause. "You're already dead, Valezon. You just don't know it yet." Every Dominion officer in the room stiffened. The air felt heavier, as if the ship itself was suffocating. Valezon held onto his authority. "If you had truly won, you wouldn't be speaking to me. You would have already finished it." Silence. Then, slowly, a chuckle. Not mocking. Not arrogant. Just certain. "You don't understand what's happening to you, do you?" Reaver's voice carried a casual weight, like a predator watching its prey realize the trap was already closed. "This isn't a war anymore. You're not surrendering. You're not negotiating. You're waiting to die." The bridge filled with static. Then, the lights flickered. "Sir," an officer whispered, "they're inside the ship." Valezon's vision darkened. No. Impossible. The bulkheads were sealed. The blast doors secured. But the fear in his crew's faces told him the truth. Reaver wasn't speaking to them from a distant command center. He was already here. "We tried to warn you," Reaver continued. "We told you to leave us alone. But you wouldn't listen. You thought we were like the others." Another flicker. The screens dimmed. "You thought we'd fight fair." Something moved in the shadows. A whisper of motion in the upper levels of the bridge. Weapons raised, but there was nothing there. The static deepened. Then the main view screen changed. The fleet tracker map, once filled with Dominion ships, was now empty. All except one. This ship. The last red marker in a sea of black. Then, slowly, one word appeared on the screen in Dominion dialect. "Checkmate." Valezon lunged for the controls, clawed hands sweeping over emergency protocols. Nothing responded. Every system was locked. No power. No weapons. No escape. And then, in the dim glow of the emergency lights, the doors to the bridge slid open. A single figure stepped through. Not an army. Not a strike team. Just one. Gideon Reaver. The humans weren't superior warriors. They weren't invincible. But they did not stop. They would bleed. They would suffer. They would lose battles. But they never lost the war. And now, standing before him, was the man who had done the impossible. The man who had taken an empire of trillions and shattered it with nothing but sheer ruthlessness and strategy. Valezon's instincts screamed at him to fight, to do something, but the weight in Reaver's gaze made him hesitate. This was the gaze of a man who had already killed him. "You think wiping us out will make you safe?" Valezon's voice came out lower than he intended, guttural, desperate. "We were order. We were civilization. Without us, the galaxy will be chaos. Reaver tilted his head, as if considering. Then, calmly, good. The Dominion warlord bared his fangs. Do it, then. His voice turned sharp, defiant. Kill me. Reaver's lips curled into something almost like a smirk. You don't get it. Valezon's claws twitched. Get what? This isn't about killing you, Reaver said, stepping forward. His voice was almost gentle. This is about making sure everyone else watches it happen. Valezon's heart pounded against his ribs. The realization hit him like a blade to the gut. They weren't just destroying the Dominion. They were making it an example. Humanity wasn't just here to win. They were here to burn the lesson into history itself. Before Valezon could move, Reaver's knife was already at his throat. A clean, perfect cut. Not enough to kill. Just enough to let him feel it. The Dominion officers stood frozen, too stunned to react. Reaver stepped back, letting Valezon stagger. Transmit this to every surviving Dominion world. Reaver's voice was directed to the ship's comms, which, somehow, was still under human control. They need to understand what happens next. One of the screens flickered to life, broadcasting live across the scattered remains of the Dominion's empire. Valezon, bleeding, shaking, broken. And Reaver, standing over him, voice calm. You made a mistake. The warlord gritted his teeth, trying to hold onto his last shred of dignity. And what was that? Reaver's eyes burned with something far more dangerous than rage. Certainty. You led us into the stars. The transmission cut. A sharp, precise shot ended High Lord Valezon. Across the Dominion, the message was received. They weren't fighting for dominance anymore. They were fighting to survive. And humanity? Humanity had already won. The last thing the Dominion heard before their empire crumbled was the sound of Reaver's voice, carried through every remaining signal, every hijacked frequency. We are coming. The Dominion fleet was gone. Their worlds, burning. Their leaders, dead. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Gideon Reaver stood in the command center of the captured Dominion dreadnought, watching the incoming transmissions flood through the human-commandeered network. Every surviving Dominion world was broadcasting distress signals, begging for reinforcements that no longer existed. Civilian governments were fracturing. The remnants of their military were scattering into the void, desperate to flee, desperate to hide. It didn't matter. Humanity wasn't stopping. A voice cut through the tense silence. Orders, sir? Reaver didn't blink. No survivors. The bridge crew of the former Dominion flagship, a mix of elite human operatives and AI-driven combat systems, moved with lethal efficiency. Every protocol had been overwritten, every Dominion failsafe repurposed. This ship, once the pride of an empire, was now nothing more than a blade in humanity's hand. And it was about to strike again. A transmission from a Dominion holdout crackled through the comms. A desperate, trembling voice. Please, we surrender. We? Reaver silenced the signal with a flick of his wrist. There would be no negotiations. A younger officer hesitated. Sir, should we at least consider terms for? Reaver's gaze snapped toward him, and whatever hesitation had lingered in the officer's voice evaporated. There were no terms. There was no peace. Not after what they had done. The Dominion had started this war with a campaign of extermination. They had called for the death of every man, woman, and child in humanity's colonies. They had tried to erase an entire species. Now, they were learning what it meant to fail. A tactical officer reported from his station, voice clipped. High priority target identified. Dominion core world, Eleth Prime. Primary infrastructure intact. Estimated civilian population? Burn it, Reaver said flatly. The officer hesitated. Sir, if we hit that world, we'll be. This isn't about strategy anymore, Reaver interrupted. His voice was steady, measured, terrifying in its finality. They have to understand. They have to know what happens when you try to erase humanity. The officer swallowed hard and nodded. The command was relayed. The fleet adjusted course. There would be no warnings. There would be no second chances. Hours passed in silence as the ship hurtled toward its next target. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, each of them understanding the weight of what was to come. They had fought too long, lost too much. There was no room for mercy. Reaver stood at the viewport as the planet came into view, Eleth Prime, one of the Dominion's most advanced civilizations. Towers stretched high into the sky, cities bathed in artificial light. Millions of lives below, unaware that judgment had arrived. They would learn soon enough. A final transmission from the planet's surface broke the silence. A Dominion official, his voice shaking. "You don't have to do this. The war is over. You've won. We surrender." Reaver exhaled, slow and steady. "No," he said. "You lose." The order was given. Orbital bombardment systems activated. A cascade of fire rained down from the heavens. Explosions ripped through the planet's surface, entire city blocks disintegrating in a matter of seconds. The sky itself seemed to burn. Shockwaves rolled through the capital as the Dominion's final stronghold collapsed beneath the weight of its own destruction. Screams echoed through the intercepted transmissions. Then silence. Reaver turned away from the viewport before the flames had even died down. His work wasn't finished. There were still Dominion forces left in the galaxy. Still remnants clinging to the hope that they could escape. They couldn't. They wouldn't. Humanity had been pushed to the brink. Forced into a war they never wanted. And now, the message was clear. There would be no coming back from this. One of his officers approached, standing stiffly at attention. "Sir." New intelligence reports show scattered Dominion survivors gathering at the outer rim. It's possible they're trying to regroup. Reaver nodded. "Then we hunt them down." The officer hesitated. "Some of them might just be trying to run, sir. To hide." A long silence. Then Reaver spoke, voice unwavering. "They didn't let us run." The officer swallowed, nodding. No further words were needed. The command was understood. Across the former Dominion territories, the last survivors of a once mighty empire fled into the stars, their warships running dark, their leaders reduced to ghosts. They whispered among themselves, desperate for hope, clinging to the belief that if they could just escape far enough, if they could just disappear, maybe, just maybe, humanity would leave them alone. They were wrong. Reaver's final transmission echoed through every surviving Dominion outpost. "You wanted to erase us. Now, we erase you." And with that, the hunt began. The Dominion remnants fled deeper into the void, but there was nowhere left to go. Their vast empire, once spanning thousands of star systems, had been reduced to scattered outposts and broken fleets. Communications had gone silent. No reinforcements were coming. No allies remained. Yet, they still ran. The final warships drifted in the black, engines running low, crews clinging to the last shreds of hope. Maybe if they had long enough, if they disappeared into the lawless edges of space, humanity would move on. Maybe the nightmare would end. But Gideon Reaver did not believe in maybe. The humans had learned, long ago, that leaving an enemy behind only invited another war. The Dominion had not shown mercy when they marched on human colonies, when they burned homes, when they slaughtered innocents in the name of extermination. And so, there would be no mercy now. A transmission came through the fleet's encrypted channels. The last Dominion holdouts had gathered near the dead star of Vesk 7, a desperate attempt to regroup. They thought they had time. Thought they could plan their next move. They were wrong. Reaver watched the fleet's holographic display as his ships closed in. His forces had already taken over the Dominion's own stealth technology, their intelligence networks, their battlefield algorithms. Every strategy the Dominion had ever relied on belonged to humanity now. He didn't need a full assault. He only needed the right strike. His second-in-command, Captain Darius Holt, stood at his side, waiting for the final order. "They don't even know we're here." "They don't need to," Reaver said. "Not yet." There was no need for a prolonged engagement. No need for a grand battle. War had rules. This was not war. This was the final act of annihilation. Reaver's forces moved with surgical precision, cutting into the heart of the Dominion fleet without a single warning shot. Their first ship blinked off the map in a silent explosion, hull ripped apart before the crew even had time to scream. The second followed seconds later. The Dominion fleet finally noticed. Panic spread through their ranks as their sensors came to life, revealing what they had feared most. Humanity was already among them. A desperate voice crackled through the open comms. "This is Admiral Telvar of the Dominion. Whoever is out there, we surrender. Do you hear me? We surrender." Reaver leaned forward, studying the terrified fleet. "Are you afraid, Admiral?" Silence. Reaver didn't let him answer. "You should be." The Dominion ships tried to form a defensive line, but it was already too late. Their formation collapsed as human forces moved through them like a scalpel through flesh. Some tried to flee. Their ships were disabled before they even cleared the system. Reaver let them listen as one by one, their ships were cut down. No escape pods were allowed to drift away. No survivors were left to carry the tale. Yet still, the Admiral's voice persisted. "You don't have to do this. We've lost. Humanity has won." Reaver's expression didn't change. "You still don't understand." A pause. "What don't I understand?" The Admiral's voice cracked. "You thought this was a war," Reaver said, voice calm, precise. "It wasn't. This was a lesson." The Dominion had never fought an enemy that learned. Every species they'd crushed had fought the same way, desperate, rigid, predictable. They had expected humanity to break the same way. But humans had studied war long before they ever reached the stars. They had perfected the art of strategy long before they ever met another species. The Dominion had taught them what total war looked like. Now, humanity had rewritten the rules. Reaver switched the channel. The transmission went out to every remaining Dominion survivor across the galaxy. "This is how it ends. Your empire is gone. Your leaders are dead. There is no place left for you." Telvar's voice came through in barely a whisper. "Please, we can be more than this." Reaver's fingers tightened around the console. "You had that chance. And you wasted it." A single command. The last Dominion flagship detonated from within, its own reactor turned against it. And then, silence. Reaver turned to Holt. "Status?" "Confirmed, sir. No escape pods. No survivors." Reaver exhaled, slow and steady. It was done. The Dominion was no more. The bridge crew remained silent, as if waiting for the weight of what they had done to sink in. They had not just defeated an enemy. They had erased them. But Reaver felt nothing. He turned to the fleet officer. "Open a line to Earth Command." The connection stabilized. A voice came through, crisp and waiting. "Fleet Commander." "Mission accomplished," Reaver said. "The Dominion is finished." A pause. Then, acknowledged. No celebration. No speeches. Because they had expected nothing else. Holt watched as Reaver turned back to the viewport, gazing at the drifting wreckage of the last Dominion fleet. "Do you think they were right?" Holt asked after a long silence. Reaver didn't look at him. "About what?" Holt hesitated. "That we became something worse than them." Reaver finally turned. His expression was unreadable. "The difference is, we never wanted this war. They did." Holt looked back at the stars, his face hard. "And if the next species that finds us decides we're the real monsters?" Reaver let the silence stretch between them. Then they'll be right. He turned away. There was no need to say anything more.